So, ladies and gentlemen, we are starting our next session. This time it will be devoted to healthy streets, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Lucy Saunders, a director of the company who devised the Healthy Streets concept. Mayor of London has come up with a new transport strategy for London for the upcoming 25 years, and one of the key pillars of this concept was the healthy street concept. So, Department of Transport in London is using a number of metrics to apply and to assess the quality of all other projects which are currently underway in the city. And I'm delighted to welcome Lucy here. She's one of the authors of the concept. So, Lucy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, this is a bit of a treat for the end of the conference because we get to really talk in a bit more detail about Healthy Streets approach. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this session. I'm starting off with this picture, which is one of the suburbs of London. And this street here, you can see there's a cycle track and there's a wide pavement. This is a space where people can spend time and dwell. And this used to be a lot more dominated by traffic, so parked cars and vehicles moving. And the reason why it's important is that if you look at global cities around the world for the last 20 years, they've been making the city centre look really nice. And they can show you a picture from any city in the world of streets that look really good. But a test of how healthy a city is what do the streets look like when you get out into the suburbs? And this shows that London's really embracing health, because even in the suburbs, they're making an effort to make the streets good for people. It hasn't always been this way in London, though. So I developed the Healthy Streets approach, and I first took it to London in 2013. And in 2014, they published the first document that talked about Healthy Streets approach. But really, for about 4 years, I spent a lot of my time making the case for health in London. It was a new topic, and it took some time to get people to really understand the benefit of it. And then the last couple of years, it's really taken off. And I'm going to be talking you through in the next 20 minutes the process that you have to go through, the 10 steps for embedding a whole new way of doing things in transport strategy. So even if you're not remotely interested in public health, this framework applies to whatever kind of approach you're taking. Shall I wait for this?
Уважаемые гости Московского урбанистического форума 2019. Через несколько минут в зале Москва начнется интервью на тему «Между обществом и территорией. Зачем городу нужен архитектор?». Просим занимать места в зале Москва.
So the first thing you have to do is you have to pick your priorities. A lot of cities, you'll see their strategy is that they're going to do everything for everyone, everywhere. And it makes it really hard to really focus on a goal, on a vision. So the first thing is pick the priorities. And in London, they sensibly picked the top 5 health issues. And these all relate to how motorised road transport is managed on streets. So the London Underground is the famous part of the transport system in London, but actually only 20% of travel happens on London Underground. The rest of the time, people are on the street. This is where they live, this is where they shop, this is where they spend their free time, and it's not a healthy environment. So the focus is on addressing these 5 big health issues, which are physical activity, road traffic injuries, air quality, noise pollution, and severance, which is when it's difficult to get from where you are to where you want to be, which I think is, for those of you from Moscow, a common experience when you get to a large road and you have to wait for ages or you have to go underneath to get to where you want to go. These health issues, they're pretty depressing and they're pretty boring to most people. So if I went around trying to bring people on board with my idea and I just talked to them about death and disease and illness, I'm not going to make very many friends. So the key thing for me to do is to take these top priorities and to frame them in a way that will bring a wide range of people to work with me. And the framing that I developed for this is called Healthy Streets. And Healthy Streets is about focusing all of your efforts, all of your decisions on how can you make the streets better for people? How can you change the human experience on streets? And maybe you think, well, that's only part of the story. The truth is, if you don't deliver on these 10 indicators, then you're doing something wrong somewhere in the system. These are the true litmus test of whether things are actually getting better and whether you're making the right decisions. An important step for me was getting a high-profile champion for my idea. So I mentioned that I spent several years working in London, and it wasn't until the Mayor of London really championed this idea that things really took off. So a champion is really important. My champion was the mayor. His name is Sadik Khan, and when he came into office in 2016, he said, "My vision is to create healthy streets." And the reason why he was so keen on this approach was because he knew that it was important to the people of London that he could offer them streets which had less traffic, less pollution, less noise, where the streets are more attractive and accessible and people-friendly. The important thing when a politician says what you want them to say is that you make sure you get it written down as quickly as possible before they move on to the next subject. So I made sure that when I had the support of the mayor, the next thing I did was get a vision document written really fast. So the vision document is called Healthy Streets for London, and this came out in 2017, and it set the priorities. It took what the mayor had said and it put it in writing so that we could be held account for delivering it. It said we'll put people and their health at the heart of decision making, that there will be a clear shift away from private car use, that there are 3 levels for delivering healthy streets. It's not as simple as just changing the street environment. You have to change the spatial planning, and you also have to change the way you manage all your transport networks to deliver those street level changes. And finally, it said we're going to measure our success against the 10 healthy streets indicators. And I'll come on to how we did that later on. When you have a vision document, often it looks good, it sits on a shelf and nothing changes. So you have to take the vision document and make sure it's turned into policy as fast as possible. So this is what we did with Healthy Streets. It was not only embedded in the transport strategy, but Healthy Streets is in all of the mayor's statutory strategies. So everyone who works in government, city level in London has to deliver healthy streets. And this is an important element of healthy streets. Traditionally, people think the traffic engineer and the transport planner are responsible for how the streets look and feel. And the problem with this is that if you don't like what they're doing, you don't have any say in changing it. So you have to make the role of a wide range of people the role to improve streets. So spatial planning is really important. If you allow developers to build housing upon housing upon housing in urban sprawl, you end up with a place that is really hard to make healthy. So the spatial plan for London says you are only allowed to build if you build mixed-use, high-density developments with low car parking and high cycle parking. And every new development has to have really good streets around it, and you have to spend your money as a developer on getting the streets good. So that's really important. But we also have to make sure that the police are enforcing safe streets, that the environmental policies are supporting cleaner air and reduced noise and more trees. So all the different stakeholders are involved in delivering healthy streets. But maybe the key one is the transport strategy. This is where all the money sits. So this is where the plan for delivery comes in, because the transport strategy is a 25-year plan. But what you need is you need to show that you're serious about this 25-year plan by making sure that you have money for budgeted activities for the coming years, so everyone can see you're really going to do this. The transport strategy for London has 25-year goals of 80% journeys by car, by public transport, walking and cycling, not by car, by 2041. That every Londoner will walk or cycle for at least 20 minutes a day by 2041. There will be 0 deaths and injuries. There will be reduced cars and reduced emissions. These 25-year goals they need something to back them up. What are we going to do in the next 5 years to deliver this 25-year plan? Well, we have a business plan. So the 25-year plan is at the top of this slide. This is the strategy. But the business plan says we will spend £2.3 billion over the next 5 years to deliver the first 5 years of this 25-year strategy. So we have costed projects that we promise we will build for you in the next 5 years. But the professionals who work in large organizations are sometimes not motivated by a 5-year business plan. 5 years can feel like a long time. So we then have a 1-year target. So everyone has to focus over the course of the next year to deliver specific goals. And this is called the scorecard. And that's really important for changing the behavior of people making decisions in the Transport Authority. Creating tools to support delivery is the next step. There's no point in having the money allocated and having the goal set if the practitioners, the engineers, the designers, the decision makers have no idea how they're meant to be doing things differently. So you have to give them some tools. So a Healthy Streets toolkit has been put together. I worked on all these tools with the different professional groups who needed to use them. And I'm going to show you a few of these tools to help you see what Healthy Streets really means in practice. The first one is called the Guide to Healthy Streets Indicators. And if you're interested in learning more about Healthy Streets, this is the tool I would recommend that you go and have a look at. Because it's short, it's colourful, it's got lots of pictures, so it's not too difficult to take a look at. And this is a qualitative assessment tool. So you could take this tool out onto any street in Moscow and you could do your own Healthy Streets assessment right now. You can see how good you think your streets perform against each of those 10 Healthy Streets indicators. The next tool is called Small Change, Big Impact. And this is a tool to support people who want to make a temporary change on a street that might bring the community to support a longer-term change. So some of the things that are happening in London, I've got in the pictures at the bottom of this slide here. So play streets. This is a term we use to describe when we close a street for several hours in the day for children to play outside. So for a few hours during the day, no one's allowed to drive on these residential streets because they're just for children to play. And it helps people to understand that streets aren't just for cars and that they could be used for other things. The middle picture is called a roaming parklet. And this is where a parking space is replaced with a seating area and it moves around the borough. So different businesses can bid to have this in front of their shop or their restaurant, so they get some extra seating. And it takes out a parking space. So it helps people to understand that that space next to the pavement doesn't always have to be used just for parking cars. And then the third picture here is a temporary trial of a new street layout. So in London, like in Moscow, most of our streets are very straight. And the problem with very straight streets is people drive really fast along them. So now we're trying to make our streets more curvy. But to help people to get their heads around the idea that streets don't have to be straight, what we do is we lay out these plastic things and these piles of hay to make curves, and then people drive down the street and they see, oh, it's okay, I can still drive down the street, and then we make it permanent. So this is a temporary version, but if you go to London today, you can see the real street that is now no longer straight, now it's curvy. This is a measurement tool, the Healthy Street Survey, but it's important for getting community support and to ensure that politicians feel like they can make brave decisions. So this tool is very simple. We go out onto the street and we stand on the street and we stop people who are walking along the street and we ask them to rate the street they're standing on. So we say, right here, right now on this street, how clean do you think the air is between 1 and 10? How safe do you feel between 1 and 10? How noisy is it between 1 and 10? And Londoners think that they're very busy people, so trying to get them to stop and answer some questions is challenging. So we have to be really quick about it, but they do tell us what they think. And this is one example of a street. The picture over on the far side, that shows you what the street used to look like. So it's not a particularly lovely street to be walking along. It's got an advisory cycle lane, and it's very straight and very long, so people drive really fast along it. And then the picture over here, this is what the street looks like after they made some changes to it. And the changes are not that exciting, but they're important changes. So they put in a protected cycle track, and that meant that the carriageway lanes, the traffic lanes, were narrower, and that means people drive much more slowly. Because nothing scares a driver more than the idea that the wing mirror of their car might hit the wing mirror of an oncoming car, so that makes them go really slowly. And we put in some crossing points as well. And we did our survey on the street before we made the change, and then we went back a few years later and we stopped another 100 people at random and we asked them the same questions. And we were interested to see, do people notice that the street is any different? And these are the results of the survey. So the bars at the top show you what the original score was from the first 100 people, and then the bars underneath show you what the score was from the people we stopped and asked a few years later. And people do notice that streets feel better when you make them less traffic dominated. This data may not be surprising to you, but it's very useful for the politician. Because if anyone says they don't like the changes that have been made, the politician can say, but we did a survey with all the people who live around here, and they like it better now, so it's going to stay how it is. And in fact, we're going to do it on the next street as well, and the next street, and the next street. And this tool is probably the one you're going to remember. This is the most popular tool, and it's popular because it's a quantitative tool, and it's for street designers and engineers, and maybe we have some designers in the audience this evening. So this is a quantitative tool for assessing a design of a street. So before you even build it, you know how much of an improvement you're delivering and how aligned with policy your proposal is. So here's an example of one place where we applied this tool. You see the picture over on the far side is what the street looked like before. It was 4 lanes of traffic, which in London is as big as a road gets. So we don't have any Moscow-style streets. This is as bad as our streets get, 4 lanes of traffic. And it has replaced them with a cycle track and no traffic lanes and a place to walk. And we ran this quantitative check tool to see how does the street before compare with the street afterwards. And this is what gets produced by the tool. The blue circle here, this shows you the score in the baseline conditions, and then the red circle shows you what the proposed design is going to deliver. So you can, before you've built anything, you can have a look and say, do we think this is good enough? Maybe we should do some more. Maybe we should make some changes to the design. How can we do better? It really drives up performance. We also monetize health benefits, and this is for the business case. We find that if you look at traditional business cases for transport projects, they will show huge monetized benefits for increasing space for cars. But when we add in the health benefits, we find huge positive business cases for making streets better for people. So I developed a number of documents to support practitioners in monetizing the health benefits. And this is an example of a junction that was changed before and after. And then over the side you can see what the monetized benefit each year is from the additional walking and cycling that people are doing in that location. Number 8 is spread the word. So you can have the policy, and you can have your targets, and you can have your business plan, and you can have your tools. But if the people who need to be doing their job differently don't understand why, and they don't care, then you won't get the change that you need. So a big part of my job is talking to people and giving them the opportunity to ask me difficult questions, to challenge me, to try and identify some reason why it won't work, and then we can talk through how we're going to deliver healthy streets. It's not easy and it's not straightforward, but we have to spend the time talking together to work out how we're going to do it. So I do a lot of training sessions with people where they have the chance to really think through what this means for them in their job. Number 9 is track progress. So if you're not tracking progress, then you can't prove to people that you're doing what you promised you would do. So I've worked out quite a lot of different ways to track our progress over the next few years, but I'm going to share with you one particular approach which I think is really interesting. This is called the Healthy Streets Assessment. So what this is an app on a phone. But this isn't an app that anyone gets. The only people who get to use this app are trained assessors It's a small group of people who I have trained up, and they get sent to a random location picked somewhere in the city. So you see over in the corner there's a map of London with lots of coloured dots. These are all the locations in this year that the trained assessors are going to, 1,500 locations. So they go to the location, and when they get there, their app is activated and they have to start walking around the street. They have a starting point and they walk 50 meters along the street. They cross the street, they walk 100 meters back, and then they cross the street and they walk back to where they started. And they do that over and over again for about 45 minutes while they fill in 100 data points. And the data points cover these 6 broad areas up here, and they collect loads of data that's really useful. Healthy Streets is not just about the design of the street, but it's also about how are people using the street. Are there children playing? Are there people driving illegally fast? Are there people parked on the pavement? Are there people sitting and chatting with their friends? So it doesn't just collect data about how does the street look from an engineering point of view, but also how are people using it? How are they responding to what is there? And the level of detailed data that you get from this is enormously helpful for driving up the quality of performance, not just of the engineers, but for the police and the team who clean the streets, and the people who look after the plants, and the people who clean away the graffiti. So all these different parts of the organization all now have useful data they can use to ensure they do their job better. But because we also have these data points across the whole city, we can see year on year, are we getting things better? Where do we need to do more work? Where do we need to improve? And London is made up of 33 districts. So you can also show the district how they compare with their neighbouring district, and you can get a little bit of competition. Oh, you're not quite as healthy as your neighbouring district. Let's have a look at what you need to change so that you can do better. So this kind of data is really, really helpful. And we can also use it for any changes that we're making to evaluate the benefits of those changes. So it's a very versatile data set. And my last key point for what I think is essential for making change in how things are done, for really embedding a new system, is to bring your friends along with you. So I developed the Healthy Streets approach, and the first city I implemented it was London. And it would be a real shame to me if in 20 years' time people say, oh, remember London did that thing 20 years ago. What I want is in 20 years' time that we're all doing it. So now I work with cities in other countries, big towns, small towns, who are all interested in taking the Healthy Streets approach, because it's much more powerful if everyone's pulling in the same direction than if we're all doing things differently. So here are some of the cities I'm working with already. We've got Auckland and Singapore and Manchester and Budapest, but I guess the big question for us is where next for Healthy Streets? Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, for an interesting presentation. I will switch in Russian for the question.
So it's more than 10 years the program for restoration of the streets to pedestrians and bike riders. It's been going all over the world, and Moscow is not the exception. So we're implementing the program My Street. In the framework of it, the whole downtown of the city has been reconstructed. And so what's the novelty? What's the new approach of Healthy Streets program? The question goes, and how come that you managed to prepare this integrated document for the development of this program for the public spaces?
So this is a really good question. I mentioned at the beginning that cities everywhere in the city centre, they're making it nicer for people, and it's quite easy to make the case for that. You say, we have lots of tourism here, we should make the city centre less traffic dominated, and you can broadly get some support for that. But people don't just live and spend all their time in the city centre. They spend their time on the streets where they live and on the streets where they shop. So you have to have a framework that covers all streets everywhere in the city, and that helps you to make the business case and to change your default decision making so that every decision anywhere in the city is delivering better streets for people, that you don't just have a really nice city centre that the tourists all think is really lovely, but actually in reality most people who live in the city don't spend that much time on those streets and they don't get the benefit from it.
На протяжении последних
So within the last 2 days of that forum, the topic of health was everywhere in all speeches, you see, and this healthcare topic has been present in your concept. But however, this concept is pretty urbanistic. So is it real norm for the development of the cities, of the urbanistics, to get this topic of health? Is it real norm for other cities? Are we moving all in that direction? Only some people, they're coming up to it.
So I would say that London is right at the forefront of focusing on improving public health. But the reason why the framework was successful is because while at the very heart of it, it's about improving public health, the framing of it, those 10 healthy streets indicators, they are appealing to a lot of people for different reasons. So if you're someone who really cares about tourism, you can see those 10 indicators are good for tourism. If you care about economic prosperity, you can see those indicators are good for that reason. If you really care about the environment and climate change and resilience, you can see that you need the same solution as well. So this one framework, it appeals to a wide range of people, and that makes it transferable to different locations. So even if the city government is not really focused on public health, they can most likely see that this framework delivers what they need, and the framing of it makes it popular with people. So if you have a democracy and you are relying on the support of the residents to make change happen, you have to have a framework and a vision that really appeals to them. In my experience, the cities that have been really struggling are the ones who are trying to deliver the same good benefits of more space for walking and more space for cycling, but they're doing it in a way that the residents don't understand that it's beneficial for them. They feel like something's being taken away from them. They feel like they're being deprived. And that means that they say, no, thank you, we don't want it. And you can't deliver the scale of change you want. So you end up making a few streets in the city centre nice, where no one lives there and they're not going to complain too much, but actually the big changes you need citywide are a real struggle to deliver.
как раз очень интересно к моему следующему вопросу.
So it's rather interesting. Next question: how London citizens perceive this program, and probably some remote areas also, how they perceive? Do all support this program?
So I think what's different about this approach is that in the past, when the approach was from a transport planning perspective, what we would do is we would say, on this street, we're going to build a new cycle lane for you so that you can cycle. And many of the residents would say, I don't cycle now, and I don't imagine I ever am going to cycle, so why would I want you to dig up my street to put in somewhere for me to cycle? The new approach goes to the residents and says, rate your street right now. How do you think it feels? Do you feel safe? Do you feel relaxed? Do you feel the air is clean? Do you feel that it's not too noisy? And these are all things that most people would want from a street environment. And they'll probably say, it's quite noisy, it doesn't feel very safe, I don't feel very relaxed, I wouldn't choose to walk and cycle here. So then your next question to them is, what could we do on your street that would mean that you would be feeling safer and happier and more relaxed? And they'd say, oh, well, I guess if people were driving a bit more slowly and if there was less parking, and they start proposing all the things that you wanted to do anyway, but they feel it's coming from them, it's their proposal, and so they own it. But you also raise the important point of, does everyone everywhere like this approach, or is there a different view in some places to others? And the thing about healthy streets is it doesn't set a specific standard that every street has to meet. Because what you might want to achieve in your city centre street, it will be very different to what you can realistically achieve on the outer edges of your city in the next 5 years. So you try and improve your indicators, but you don't try and do it in the same way everywhere. and you don't have the same level of ambition everywhere. So in the very centre of London, our ambition is that we will get to about 95% of journeys on foot, by bicycle or by cycling, on foot, by cycle or by public transport by 2041. But on the outer edges of London that have fields and horses and cows, we are not expecting 95% of journeys to be done in this way by 2040. They have a much lower target because we adjust to the different contexts that we're working with.
Спасибо большое за
Thank you very much for that interesting discussion. To be honest, it's one of the most interesting sessions as of today. I would like to give thanks to Lucy for coming here and to all our guests. Thank you very much.